Discover how one cowboy's encounter with 5 Apache women unveiled an incredible transformation. Jake shifted in the saddle as the sun bore down on the cracked earth of his family's ranch, a vast expanse of land that had been his for longer than he could remember. The sky was painted a vivid blue, so harsh and unforgiving, mirroring the weight in his chest. His family had worked this land for generations, their sweat, blood, and resilience carving it into existence. But now, looming like storm clouds, the threat of losing it pressed upon him like an anchor. Unpaid bills had begun to pile like weeds, and creditors whispered of foreclosure. Each day, he felt the sting of a heritage slipping through his fingers. It felt almost like a betrayal. As Jake rode along the perimeter, his thoughts stirred with bitterness. He felt compelled to save the ranch, fueled not just by pride, but a gnawing fear of what losing it would mean. Disappointment, shame, an inheritance sullied in his grasp. But modern America had other plans for him, and Jake couldn't ignore the ticking clock of economic doom looming in the background. The seemingly endless cycle of debt loomed like a specter, taunting him with its certainty. Then, unexpectedly, he spotted them, 5 Apache women standing near the ridge. A skeptical knot twisted in his stomach. What business did they have on his land? And more than that, what could they possibly understand about a country boy's struggle to maintain his legacy? He couldn't quell the instinct to avert his gaze. Instead, he found himself captivated by their resolve. Each carried a certain strength, a fierce wisdom, stories etched into the lines of their faces that whispered of a different kind of work, the kind that honored the land unlike ever before. He hesitated, grappling with ingrained biases, a preconception that made them seem like strangers from a distant world. Yet, as the days wore on and he encountered them more frequently, skepticism gradually became curiosity. They spoke of survival, of seasons and cycles. He began to listen, the stories weaving an intricate tapestry that challenged the very fibers of his individualism. In those narratives, he found something he had lost, an understanding of community, respect for the earth, and a deep-rooted connection he couldn't ignore. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. But the more immersed Jake became in their insights, the heavier the burden he felt. The banker's demands, the whispers in town, and the haunting shadows of his family legacy. The pressures swirled around him like a tornado, waiting for the moment to strike. He could either resist the tide, keeping his traditional ways, or risk embracing an idea that felt daring, a trade secret for sustainable ranching one of the women offered, one that could potentially save everything he held dear. Jake's heart raced with anxiety, each beat echoing the challenge that loomed ahead of him as he stood at the crossroads of family honor and unprecedented opportunity. Could he truly meld the teachings he had received with the traditions of his forefathers? The winds of change howled, but was he ready to answer their call? As the sun sank low, casting haunting shadows across the land he loved, doubts clawed at him with fierceness. The clash within him grew more intense. Was he willing to gamble everything on a path that felt as uncertain as the dry ground beneath his horse? The horizon shimmered with possibilities, but the stakes could not have been higher. Jake felt the land holding its breath, and he wondered if he could trust the 5 women who had come to challenge everything he thought he knew. Jake's thoughts whirled chaotically as night fell over the ranch, the constellations twinkling down as witnesses to his internal struggle. He leaned against the weathered fencing that marked the boundary of his property, gazing out at the land that had held his family's legacy for so long. In the dim light, it had a mystical quality, bathed in silver shadows and soft whispers carried by the wind. Yet no amount of beauty could drown out the urgency resonating in his chest. He could feel the bank's disdainful grip tightening, each day drawing closer to a reckoning. His encounters with the Apache women surged through his thoughts in vivid flashes. Their laughter, the stories they shared, the strength they embodied. It was disconcerting but undeniable. They had extended a pathway illuminated by ancestral wisdom, one that urged him to reconsider his own convictions. Yet every instinct in him resisted the allure. Could he relinquish the very identity he had fought to protect all his life? Then it hit him, not merely as an epiphany, but as a relentless necessity. He hadn't just inherited the ranch, he had inherited the duty to adapt and preserve it for future generations. He felt a ripple of resolve stir amidst the confusion. The women's sustainable methods, though foreign to him, could be his ticket out of this turmoil. The allure of understanding something profound about his own land beckoned him forward. Jake began to explore these ideas with caution. One afternoon, while gathering tools in the barn, he came across a dusty box filled with documents from the ranch's early days, ledgers, blueprints, sketches. He scarcely remembered how long it had been since he'd browsed these pages, owing to his focus on the present crisis. Each letter and ink stroke spoke volumes, reminding him of the resourcefulness his ancestors had relied upon. He couldn't shake the echo of their trials from his mind. They had faced pestilence, droughts, economic hardships, yet they had persisted. As he read through the entries, he began to scribble his own thoughts on a notepad he kept at the edge of the box. Jake created plans for rotating crops, utilizing what the women had taught him about soil management. Could he start small, creating a patch for crops less reliant on the changing seasons? Would he have the courage to invite the Apache women to join him and share their knowledge more openly? Days turned into weeks as Jake worked alone under the baking sun, initially hesitant yet deeply curious. The burdens of tradition started to lift, revealing potentials he had never considered. He struggled some nights, pitting his instinct against the lessons learned from the women, but slowly the two worlds began to integrate, as if he was uniting two halves of his identity. However, even as progress unfurled, a new tension emerged. Whispers among the locals turned darker. Accusations of submitting to outsiders challenged his resolve. Jake felt the isolation of mounting pressure, the community of the past distancing themselves as he ventured on this new path. Would they ever understand what he aimed to achieve? Or would their disdain drive him to a definitive turning point, one steeped in betrayal? Just as he began to find a rhythm, an unexpected event would thrust him into a confrontation. It was clear, change never came without repercussions. As Jake prepared to see the Apache women one final time to present his plans, he could feel the ground shift beneath him, as if echoing the precarious balance he was dancing on. The moment had come to face the truth of his convictions, and it held the weight of everything he'd dreamed of, along with the risk of losing it all. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the ranch as Jake stood at the edge of his property, determination etching lines into his brow. Today was the day he would meet the Apache women, a moment he had both anticipated and dreaded. He could feel the churning in his gut. A fierce battle between the need for acceptance from his community and the desire to forge a new identity shaped by his evolving beliefs. Every shadow that fell across the earth whispered doubts. What if they rejected his plans? What if the locals contested his new methods even more vehemently upon discovering he sought help from those they deemed outsiders? Jake inhaled deeply, trying to steel himself. He had spent weeks revising his presentation, coupling tradition with innovation, and now he was about to stake everything on this one meeting. As he approached the small clearing where they agreed to gather, he caught sight of the Apache women. They stood united, their faces a mixture of warmth and curiosity. The elder, with her silver hair cascading like a river down her back, greeted him with a nod. It was a gesture of respect, one that made Jake's heart race with both pride and fear. This was more than just a meeting. It felt like a merging of destinies. "Jake," she said, her voice steady, "you've been considering the land, wondering how best to honor it and those who tended it before you." He nodded, surprised at the perceptiveness in her words. Had he shared anything with them, or was it simply their intuition guiding them? "I have," he replied, searching their eyes for any sign of reproach. "I want to incorporate your methods into my ranching practices. I believe it can help preserve our land." Each word was a gamble, exposed and raw. The women exchanged glances before the young woman with the bright smile stepped forward. "You've been curious," she affirmed, "but curiosity can lead to fear. There are those who fear change, those who think they own the land. You face a choice, Jake. Will you let that fear bind you, or will you step into the unknown?" Each word she spoke seemed weighted with wisdom, dragging out his own uncertainties. Jake felt the pull of her words travel deep within. Perhaps this was his moment of liberation, a call to define himself beyond the shadow of what others expected. They wanted to help, but what if it didn't diminish his identity? Instead, it ought to enrich it. "I'm ready to learn," he asserted, feeling a new fire ignite within him. "I want to work together. I've drawn up plans I want to share." As he presented his notes, detailing crop rotations and sustainable practices, he noticed the mixed expressions on their faces. Relief mingled with apprehension. Could this outsider be earnest in his intentions? The elder leaned in closer, her gaze cutting through his veneers. "Honor your roots, Jake, but do not be anchored by them. They can be a foundation, not a cage." Her words resonated deeply, yet uncertainty still clung to him, a constant reminder of the impending judgment he would face back home. Days later, as he returned to his ranch with the women's teachings weaving through his mind, he could still sense the skepticism of the townsfolk hovering like storm clouds. The whispers grew louder, punctuated by pointed looks and the unspoken question of betrayal suffocating the air. Many were resentful of his defiance against tradition, dismissing his ambitions before he even put them into practice. Driven now by a commitment to prove them wrong, Jake threw himself into cultivating the patches he had prepared with the Apache methods. Each furrow he plowed felt like a small victory against the mounting pressure. But that pressure was more than mere whispers. It was a force, a tide that threatened to wash away everything he had begun to build. Can one man's resolve withstand the weight of inherited expectations? The very ground he traversed felt shifting, charged with conflict. The time was drawing near when he would have to confront not only the local naysayers, but also his own fears of becoming what they accused him of, a traitor to his heritage and a fool for believing in something different. As the sunset painted the sky crimson, Jake stood at the crossroads of tradition and transformation, poised for a showdown that would demand more than he knew he had to give. Would he emerge as the keeper of both identities, or would fate wrest him from his own aspirations? The crisp morning air was tinged with the scent of earth and potential as Jake surveyed the changes he had begun to implement on the ranch. His hands bore the marks of labor, the calluses a testament to his determination to make the Apache methods work. Each line of furrowed earth was not just a crop, it was a symbol of his resolve, a way to reclaim his identity, and a bold challenge to the judgments that loomed over him. He spent long hours tending to the fields, his mind racing with thoughts of innovation interwoven with tradition. The elder's words echoed in his head, reminding him that roots were not something to be ashamed of, but rather a foundation for growth. It was a fine line he walked, grappling with the past while reaching for a future that felt uncertain, yet exhilarating. As the days unfolded, however, the tension grew palpable. Neighbors who once had friendly nods became shadowy figures on horseback, whispering among themselves. Their discontent simmered beneath the surface, and Jake could feel it even when he was alone. While cultivating the land, he was also wrestling with a deeper conflict within himself. Would pursuing this path mean abandoning everything he had known? Clarity eluded him. One particular evening, while he stood in the midst of freshly tilled earth, he found himself confronted by Charlie, a close friend from childhood. The man's broad shoulders hunched with disapproval as he eyed the rows of green, now flourishing but steeped in controversy. "What are you doing, Jake?" Charlie's voice broke through the quiet, sharp as a spurred boot on stone. "You think this is going to change anything? The folks won't accept it?" Jake felt a clenching in his stomach. "I'm trying to do what's right for the land, Charlie. I'm trying to honor what has come before, while also thinking of what's next." "Honor? You think helping those women is going to drop your name from the list of traitors?" The disdain seeped through Charlie's tone. Jake's mind spun with frustration. The notion of betrayal stung. He had spent too long struggling between acceptance and authenticity. In that moment, something within him shifted. "Maybe I am a traitor to your expectations," he shot back, surprising both himself and Charlie. "But I'm not running from who I am anymore. I'm ready to forge my own path." The words hung in the silence, lingering like an unresolved chord. Charlie's face hardened, and anger flickered in his eyes. "You're going to regret this. We don't need your kind around here anymore." With that, he spat on the ground and turned away, leaving Jake alone amidst the burgeoning crops, a raw mix of emotions swirling within him. He had stood his ground, but at a steep cost. The rift between them felt insurmountable now. Yet a flicker of confidence ignited inside him, a realization that he could change without the need for others' permission. As he took a deep breath, inhaling the essence of new beginnings, a wave of introspection washed over him. Was he truly ready to lose everything familiar for a future he wasn't sure of? He resolved to invite the Apache women back to the ranch to share his progress and seek their further insight, though the thought filled him with apprehension. They understood transformation. They embodied it. Would they see the strides he'd made, or would they perceive only his fears and failures? Jake knew the confrontation with the community was inevitable. He was now at a point where standing still was as good as falling backward. He had to move forward, step into the unknown. The weight of expectation rested heavy on his shoulders as he picked up his cap and headed toward the house. Within the walls of that familiar home, he sensed the distance growing from everything it represented. But he was no longer the boy shackled by traditional norms. He was forging a new identity, one discovery at a time. Would the Apache women accept his invitation, or would he have to face his critics alone? The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, but Jake clenched his fists, determined to seek clarity in the chaos. As dawn broke, Jake stood at the edge of his fields, the sun casting a golden light that seemed to herald new possibilities. He took a moment to breathe in the crisp air, a blend of earthiness and anticipation, filling his lungs with vigor. Today was significant. Today he was reaching out beyond the limits of his doubts, both for himself and his ranch. The decision to invite the Apache women had nudged him closer to the precipice of authenticity. He had written the invitation with care, his pen a tool for connection rather than division. The words flowed, genuine and resolute, capturing his hope that they would bring the wisdom he sensed he lacked. Yet beneath the confidence he sought to project, anxiety coiled within him. What if they perceived his challenges as self-indulgence? What if they saw only defeat instead of progress? He had seen the rift form with Charlie, and as much as he wanted to dismiss it, that vision pierced through his resolve like a persistent thorn. He couldn't shake the feeling that their judgment was a reflection of his own fears. Would his decision to seek the Apache women undermine his own standing in the community, or could it solidify his identity? As he worked the land, sweat dripped down the back of his neck, a reminder of the physical struggles mirrored in his mind. Each shovelful of soil was filled with a duality of strength and fear, the weight of expectation versus the freedom of authenticity. With each passing hour, the burgeoning crop stood tall against the soil, a metaphor for his aspirations. That night, after a long day of labor, Jake paced the small confines of his home, which felt increasingly disconnected from the man he was becoming. He glanced at a family photo resting on the mantel, a younger version of himself, carefree, untainted by strife. In that moment of vulnerability, he made a vow to dig deep into his roots, to nurture those aspects of his heritage that had been unearthing themselves since his engagement with the Apache women. Days turned into a blur of preparation as he gathered tools and resources, fumbling through what felt like the remnants of his former self amidst the excitement of transformation. It was a balance of hope and dread. Each task performed underlined his intent, yet amplified the uncertainty of how his efforts would be received. Finally, the day arrived. Jake arrived early at the agreed meeting place, feeling the flutter of anticipation in his chest. He had laid out a selection of produce, vivid greens and earthy hues representing his hard work and dedication. A part of him needed validation, acknowledgement that he wasn't just a man stubbornly clinging to old ways, but someone capable of reinventing not only his ranch, but himself. Minutes felt like hours as he waited. Doubt seeped in, chipping away at his newfound conviction. If they didn't show, would that confirm his worst fears? That he was indeed alone in this endeavor? Just when he contemplated abandoning the effort, he saw them approach. 4 women moving gracefully, each step resonating with quiet strength. The sight stirred something deep within him, a flicker of warmth rising against the coolness of his doubt. As they arrived, Jake's heart raced. He felt the weight of their gaze, as if they were judging the essence of what he had become. Would they judge him as Charlie did, or would they challenge him to grow further? "Thank you for coming," Jake said, his voice steady despite his racing pulse. He gestured toward the laid-out bounty, a blend of his labor and their teachings. Their presence alone catalyzed a hard-won shift within him, one that held promise but also a rising tide of uncertainty. With each question they posed about his methods and intentions, Jake sensed the thread of self-discovery tighten. They saw past his barriers of insecurity, inviting him to explain his choices. Yet there was an undercurrent, a challenge melded with encouragement. As he spoke of the crops, the Apache women exchanged knowing glances, and with every shared moment, a clarity unfurled in his mind. He wasn't just seeking approval, he was redefining progress on his own terms. Yet, as their discussions deepened, the inevitable confrontation with his neighbors loomed closer. The question remained, would he be willing to mentor them, or would he be left stranded in the sands of his past? The tangible tension thickened, leaving Jake clinging to a revelation. This was not just about farming methods, but the act of confronting his own identity and the society that shaped him. As they shared laughter and insights, a voice inside Jake urged him onward. He was not just forging a path for the ranch, he was working to create a legacy. Could he harness this new understanding before the looming storm of community backlash? Would he be able to fully embrace the Apache teachings while confronting those who opposed him? The answers were just out of reach, and below the surface of possible triumph, an unsettling clarity waited just beneath the skin, pressing forward. Jake stood among the Apache women, their voices a soothing balm against the fierce winds of doubt swirling within him. The air was filled with the scent of fresh produce, yet it was the warmth of their acceptance that enriched the moment. Each question they posed stirred not only his wit, but also the innermost corners of his self-doubt. "Tell us," one of them began, her eyes glinting with curiosity, "how did you come to choose these crops?" As Jake shared his reasoning, he felt an unfamiliar surge of pride. The simple answer was shaped by necessity, but the deeper truth was more profound. His selection reflected a lifeline, a desire to reclaim a connection to the land he had learned to love anew. Words flowed without the usual hesitations. The weight of his fears lightened slightly. With each nod from the women, realization settled over him. This was a village, even if it was just the four of them. Yet beneath the camaraderie, a tension loomed. With every passing moment, Jake was aware of the unspoken question. Was he ready to extend this newfound connection into his broader community? His heart thumped with uncertainty as he recalled the icy reception Charlie had given him. Would his neighbors see the depth of his commitment or dismiss it as an ill-fated whim? One of the women, an elder with a halo of silver hair, leaned closer, her voice gently insistent. "What do you seek in this collaboration, Jake?" The question pierced deeply, driving Jake's mind into quiet contemplation. Seeking validation, or something beyond? He hadn't realized until now that he wasn't just fumbling aimlessly toward a goal, he was yearning for purpose. "I want to create something meaningful," he replied, "not just for myself, but for anyone willing to adapt and expand their perspective on farming." At that moment, he saw flickers of understanding spark among them. He was revealing the truth of his vulnerabilities, and in return, he felt a reflective strength begin to spark within himself. As they exchanged stories and experiences, Jake's thoughts began to shift. Sharing his struggles opened up a deeper understanding of the challenges that faced them all. They were not isolated events, they were part of a larger tapestry that connected their histories. The realization sparked an unexpected creative impulse. Perhaps he would not just incorporate their wisdom into his farming practices, but also transform the way they engaged with their community. While profound insights cascaded through his mind, a gnawing question lingered. Would these women be willing to stand beside him as he approached his neighbors? Could they offer their knowledge not only as farmers, but as foundational pillars in a new initiative, one that encouraged collaboration amidst the weeds of misconceptions? As their discussion continued, Jake became acutely aware of an electrifying sense of purpose growing within him. He was not merely at the mercy of old prejudices. Instead, he could actively create dialogues and foster understanding that transcended the barriers built by fear. However, the closer he drew toward this goal, the more he felt the fraying edges of his relationships. With each episode of growth sparked by his new alliances, a deep-seated anxiety came to the forefront. What would happen if his old acquaintances persisted in labeling him a traitor to his land? The images of angry faces from the past haunted him. The echo of whispered judgments surrounded him like an unwanted chorus. But just then, the elder spoke again, this time with a commanding tone. "You must be prepared for the storm, Jake. Growth often invites a reckoning." Those words took root in his mind, contorting into determination. He was indeed ready to confront the storm. He could feel it simmering on the horizon. Yet, as he exchanged smiles and laughter with the women, the anxiety brewed beneath the glow of satisfaction. Would this bond be strong enough to weather the impending backlash? Jake took a deep breath, embracing the swell of newfound courage. The conversation had not only illuminated his purpose but set the stage for critical decisions to come. As the day unfolded, the thought lingered. Would he rise to meet the challenge and transform the echoes of judgment into dialogues of truth? Would he fortify his identity and leadership to carry through the tempest that awaited him, or would he retreat, allowing the past to shadow his pursuit of authenticity? In that moment of introspection, he understood a truth that felt like fire igniting within him. The time had come to face his doubts. The storm was brewing, and he was ready to embrace all that it demanded of him. Jake stepped away from the circle, his mind swirling with possibilities. Each word shared with the Apache women had illuminated shadows of doubt that had haunted him for years. Yet as the sun dipped lower in the sky, the doubt reemerged, casting a long shadow over his newfound clarity. What awaited him beyond this nurturing space? Kicking a small stone in frustration, he contemplated his return to the broader community. The thought of reaching out to Charlie, of confronting the judgments and scorn, filled him with trepidation. Had he found enough courage to stand his ground? To forge a new identity that included not just his personal growth, but also the willingness to face potential ostracism. He recalled the stories shared among the women, accounts of resilience, of survival rooted in the earth they nurtured. Their strength fed his resolve, but did he possess similar tenacity? The uncertainty gnawed at him. Every heroic tale carried the burden of personal sacrifice. Could he embrace the risk instilled by their narratives? As his feet took him back to his modest farm, he noticed the darkening skies. It was more than just an ominous weather forecast for the natural world. It reflected his internal turmoil. Would he remain tethered to past perceptions, or evolve into a leader unafraid to advocate for change? The vision of his neighbors loomed in his memory, their skeptical gazes, the dismissive nods. He wondered as he set about evening chores how to initiate a dialogue that carried weight beyond the superficial. With the Apache women's wisdom germinating in his mind, he understood that this connection to the land was not solely about crops. It was about cultivating relationships and sowing seeds of understanding. Hooked by this new awareness, Jake decided to build a plan. He reached for his notebook, sprinkling it with sketches of farming ideas intertwined with community projects. He realized he wanted to harmonize old practices with new techniques, and intermingling meant to empower and uplift. This could be his bridge. But what if they rejected it outright? The thought created a tight knot in his stomach. But just like the Apache women who faced their storms with grace, Jake refused to run away. He drew a deep breath, scribbling his thoughts with intent. Could he frame this as a partnership rather than a mere farming initiative? How could he present his alliances as an opportunity for growth, not just for himself, but for the entire community? As night fell over the farm, Jake felt the tension within him coalesce into a vivid determination. He wasn't just going to speak, he was going to engage. With each stroke of the pen, a roadmap began to emerge, one promising dialogue, compassion, and perhaps reconciliation. Yet even in his firm resolve, doubt lingered, whispering warnings of those who would never understand his journey. Would he be able to transform their fears into trust? The stakes felt higher than ever. With his heart racing, Jake packed up his notes, steeling himself for the conversations ahead. The storm he once feared was quickly becoming an invitation to redefine his place not just on the land, but within the hearts of his neighbors. As the moon cast silver over the fields, Jake understood that this was only the beginning. Tomorrow would pose challenges he could never predict. an unfolding of new relationships shaped by both hope and anxiety. He met the horizon with a fierce resolve, ready to confront not only the weather, but also the very fears that had kept him from reaching out. Would he be able to transform the impending confrontation into a catalyst for change? Or would he find himself once again retreating into the silence of his doubts? Jake closed his notebook, feeling the weight of the moment. The dawn of new possibilities approached, yet an uneasy tension wrapped around him. The reckoning was near, and with it, the chance to redefine not only his future, but his very essence. As dawn broke, the soft hues of morning light crept over Jake's farm, casting a warm glow on the troubles that weighed heavily on his mind. He could see the gentle sway of the crops in the breeze, a reminder of the life he had cultivated, yet their rustling seemed almost like whispers of doubt echoing back at him. Today was not simply another day, but rather a turning point. The conversations ahead felt like an inevitable tide, pushing him towards what had to be done. Jake steeled himself as he finished his morning routine, the smell of fresh earth mingling with the promise of rain. The deep breaths he took were both calming and distressing, grounding him while reminding him of the challenges that awaited. He advanced toward the barn where he'd arranged to meet Charlie and a few other neighbors, suggesting a dialogue that they never would have entertained yesterday. This decision, born out of newfound courage, sparked a mix of excitement and anxiety within him. As he walked, Jake replayed the memories of the Apache women. Their stories weren't mere tales, they were calls to action, urging him to shed the layers of fear that had cloaked him for too long. He envisioned their fierce determination, their ability to stride forward despite dire circumstances, and wondered if he could embody that spirit today. What if he faltered? What if they dismissed him outright? Arriving at the barn, he found Charlie and a few others already gathered, the air thick with the scent of fresh hay. The usual camaraderie felt strained, humor replaced by an underlying tension as all eyes turned to him. Jake recognized those skeptical expressions, the shields of defensiveness they wore instinctively whenever they confronted the unfamiliar. Were he to feign confidence, they would undoubtedly see right through him. His heart raced. The challenge was far from superficial. "Thanks for meeting with me," Jake started, his voice shaking slightly as he chose his words carefully. "I wanted to talk about something that's been on my mind." He took a breath, feeling an unexpected urge to dive into the details of his farming ideas and the strategies inspired by the Apache women, sustainable practices interwoven with community efforts. But there was a wall, invisible yet palpable, separating him from them. They looked at him like a child presenting a drawing. Surely it was sweet, but ultimately irrelevant. "Are you trying to tell us how to farm?" Charlie's words cut sharply through the thick air. The challenge hung there, daring Jake to respond. "No, it's not just about farming," Jake replied, his voice steadier now, the fire inside sparking to life. "It's about how we can support each other, grow together through shared exploration, and learn from each other's experiences." A murmur rippled through the group, skepticism vying with curiosity. He spoke with urgency, detailing sketches from his notebook, showcasing methods he had envisioned, intermingling old practices with modern techniques that could invigorate their land and friendships. Jake could feel their eyes narrowing, criticism swimming beneath the surface. Yet he pressed on, articulating not just a vision for sustainable cultivation, but a new framework for relationships, rooted in understanding rather than division. "Success isn't measured in just crop yield," Jake continued. "It's about how we collaborate, how we care for the land and for each other." As words poured out, he felt something shifting. The rhythm of their breaths changed, a reluctant interest hovered beneath their skepticism. Yet as Jake looked into Charlie's eyes, uncertainty struck again. What if the emotional labor grounding this conversation was for naught? Jake had approached the table with a plan, yet he realized it was evolving in real time. This wasn't merely about sharing an idea, it was an unveiling of his identity. He was no longer the silent farmer with a heart full of fear. He was an advocate for change, a potential leader forging new connections. As the barn filled with silence, Jake sensed the choice before him. He could retreat, allowing doubt to pull him back into old habits, or he could embrace this uncomfortable reality, pushing through to unearth their hidden capacities for growth and dialogue. The tension felt heavy yet invigorating. In that moment of resolution, Jake could only wonder about the direction this exchange would take. Would this openness blossom into trust, or would it lead to further division? With every heartbeat, he knew the future hinged upon this pivotal choice, a test of his newfound resolve. "Let me hear what you think," Jake finally said, his voice steady yet laced with vulnerability. The room remained still, their faces revealing nothing of what lay ahead. As he awaited their reactions, Jake's senses heightened, ready to confront the uncertainty that loomed like a storm on the horizon. Would this engagement sow the seeds for something transformative? Or would it be yet another chapter of rejection? The silence in the barn thickened like fog, every second stretched taut with anticipation. Jake felt the weight of their gazes, pressing down as if they were all conscious of a clock ticking down to an unknown moment. He had offered a glimpse into a different world, a vision rooted in cooperation and empathy, but he had no clear indication of how they would respond. Charlie shifted, the tension evident in his posture. "You really think we can change things? Just like that?" The incredulity in his tone cut through Jake's confidence, moments of doubt flaring back to life. "Change comes from the ground up," Jake replied, the words pouring out with a conviction he hadn't fully possessed moments before. "It takes all of us to commit to trying something new. Why do we always have to stick to what's failing?" The question hung between them, echoing against the wooden beams of the barn. Yet beneath the hostility of Charlie's challenge lay a deeper uncertainty, one Jake recognized in himself. What if they failed? What if he failed? That small voice in the back of his mind threatened to derail him. A woman in the group stirred, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. "It's not that simple, Jake." Her voice cracked, betraying a blend of frustration and fear. "We've always done it this way. What makes you think your ideas will work?" Jake leaned forward, searching for the right words. This was bigger than farming. It was about their livelihoods, their community's legacy. "Because this way isn't working anymore. I've seen it. The Apache women didn't just accept their circumstances. They adapted. They thrived by working together, not in isolation. It's about taking small steps toward collaboration." A murmur signed the group's mixed responses, but Jake noticed how their expressions shifted ever so slightly. He seized the moment, integrating personal stories that connected him to the land and the community. "When I was a child, my grandfather would share stories about how the fields would flourish when he worked alongside neighbors. It wasn't just about the crops, it was about trust, sharing our burdens, celebrating our successes together." The memories revived a sense of nostalgia in him, but he quickly grounded himself back in the present. Vulnerability was his ally now, the bridge that could connect him to others. "Maybe we could try something small, a pilot project," he proposed, his heart pounding with the prospect of opening the door of possibility. "Let's plant a section of land together. We could incorporate some of these methods I found in the Apache teachings. If it doesn't work, I'll step back. I'll take full responsibility." There was a visible flicker of intrigue among the group. The air transformed, electric with unspent energy. Charlie exchanged glances with the others, the walls of skepticism visibly softening. The realization began taking root. Perhaps this wasn't merely a joke. Maybe Jake was onto something worth exploring. "So we'd have to take a leap, huh?" Charlie said at last, his tone shifting. A hint of challenge lay in his words, but Jake sensed an underlying willingness too. "Exactly," Jake encouraged, internal tenacity firing up. "Trust me, I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe we could do it." The rhythm of their collective breathing changed again, an unspoken agreement brewing, a call to action waiting to rise from the ashes of doubt. This moment had expanded from confrontation to collaboration, yet Jake knew it was just the beginning. A further test awaited. "Here's the deal," Charlie said, leaning forward slightly. "We try your idea, but you're leading this thing, and if it flops, we're done. No more visions. You got that?" Jake nodded, the stakes rising. Could he navigate these new waters? The path was uncharted, but the promise hung tantalizingly within reach. Deal. As the discussions began to unfold and tentative agreements formed, Jake felt a burgeoning sense of purpose. He wasn't just pursuing a project, he was claiming his place, challenging himself to forge a new identity amongst these men and women, an evolution dubbed possible only through risk. But just as clarity surged, he felt the doubt seep back in, like a fog that wouldn't dissipate. What if they didn't trust him enough? What if he couldn't pull it off? The questions remained, lurking, whispering of insecurities he'd have to confront. Jake left the barn that day knowing he'd ignited a spark, yet grasped firmly the weight of his commitment. The stakes were higher than he had initially imagined, and with every step away from that threshold, he realized something profound. To lead was to invite vulnerability. As Jake looked out onto the fields that lay before him, he couldn't help but wonder, would the leap he was taking bring forth the growth they so desperately needed, or would it plunge him back into the shadows he had struggled to escape from? The journey ahead promised to encapsulate the true essence of trials, and at its helm would be his unwavering resolve. With that, he felt the rising anticipation of stepping into an unknown future. Was he ready? The moment of truth hovered just beyond the horizon, waiting to unveil its reality. Jake stood at the edge of his newly transformed ranch, the sun rising brilliantly above the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was the dawn of a new era, not just for his land, but for himself as well. With each passing day, the community had slowly warmed to his innovative farming methods inspired by the Apache women. The once skeptical expressions had morphed into engaged discussions as more neighbors began to join in the pilot project. What had started as a wary leap had ignited a spark of collaboration, and with it, hope. He had spent months digging deep into the soil, both literally and metaphorically, unearthing lessons from the land and the wisdom offered by the women who had become his mentors and friends. The Apache methods had reshaped his understanding of farming, transforming it into a vibrant discussion that transcended mere agriculture. Their techniques revitalized the soil and fostered the environment, just as Jake was learning to revitalize relationships within his community. Every crop he'd planted bore witness to the commitment and courage he had cultivated. The fields were lush and green, bursting with produce that reflected both tradition and change. A recent harvest festival had seen townsfolk gather to celebrate the bountiful yield. Neighbors who had once cast distrustful glances now gathered around to share recipes, stories, and laughter over community-cooked meals prepared with the very crops they had grown together. Each smile was a brick laid on the new foundation he had built, one that honored the past while embracing the future. Jake could still vividly recall standing in the barn, facing down his friend's skepticism. The memory no longer paralyzed him. Instead, it fueled his resolve. Leading the project hadn't just been an obligation. It had transformed him into a leader, one who was not afraid to challenge convention. He had learned to navigate difficult conversations, harnessing the courage he acquired from the Apache women, the strength that came from knowing that the essence of unity lay in understanding and connection. The whispers of doubt had faded considerably. Instead of retreating into the shadows, he found himself stepping into the light of recognition. The women would often visit to lend their guidance and share experiences as the ranch bloomed into a model for sustainable farming. His insights merged with theirs, and from that fusion arose a harmony that both honored his heritage and welcomed new practices. It wasn't merely the crops that flourished, it was Jake himself. He had cultivated the solid confidence once buried by familial expectation and fear of rejection. The once overbearing weight on his shoulders transformed into a badge of honor. His name became synonymous with resilience, not just for him, but for the community that rallied alongside him. Then came the day when Jake received an unexpected invitation to a state agricultural conference, an opportunity that would allow him to showcase the project. Acknowledgement from industry leaders would solidify the ranch's reputation beyond its borders, but more importantly, it was an invitation to present an alternative vision for sustainable farming rooted in community and collaboration. As he prepared his presentation, a wave of exhilaration washed over him. He was no longer just a cowboy worried about maintaining a legacy. He was a voice for transformation, armed with knowledge, experience, and purpose. The applause that greeted him at the end of the presentation ignited a fire within him, a realization that he wasn't just an inheritor of his family's ranch, he was an innovator destined to redefine it. The conference not only reinforced his achievements, but also beckoned further opportunities. People were intrigued by the collaborative model he introduced and expressed interest in replicating it in their own communities. Jake emerged not just with acclaim, but with partnerships that stretched well beyond his small ranch, reshaping his future and theirs together. In the following weeks, he continued building bridges between generations, between traditions, between the values of his lineage and the wisdom of a new era. Local representatives approached him to create cooperative workshops, inviting the Apache women to share their knowledge in broader forums. The community was ready to embrace a sustainable future together as Jake had envisioned. Standing at his ranch, Jake gazed over the flourishing fields one last time before heading into town to share the news. He was no longer bound by the weight of expectations. Instead, he stood among peers and friends. He thought about where he had once stood, teetering on the edge of inheritance and independence, overwhelmed by doubts that paralyzed action. The journey had transformed him profoundly, no longer an anxious boy fearing loss, but a man resolutely committed to growth and resilience, possessing an unwavering belief in unity. Jake looked into the horizon, where he understood not just the land, but the commitment to its legacy, one that would continue to inspire generations to come. He took a deep breath, ready to share his story, amplify the collaborative spirit he'd nurtured, and usher in a new chapter of possibility. Today wasn't just about a ranch, it was about purpose, the purpose that came from growth, connection, and authenticity. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm, your support makes a real difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending, your insights fuel our community. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to support this channel now and show us you're a true fan of stories that inspire personal overcoming. Don't wait even one more second.